My name is Catherine Blackwell, and I am writing this from the boardroom of Blackwell Consulting, the strategic advisory firm I built from nothing after discovering that my husband of 12 years had been systematically destroying our marriage while planning to steal everything we had built together. The moment that changed everything happened on our wedding anniversary, when he walked into our favorite restaurant with his 26-year-old assistant on his arm and announced to the entire dining room that he was replacing me in every aspect of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What he did not know was that I had been planning this anniversary dinner for 6 months, and the dessert I had arranged would expose every lie he had told, every dollar he had stolen, and every betrayal he had committed. By the time the evening ended, his carefully constructed deception would be shattered, his reputation would be destroyed, and I would walk away with everything he thought he had hidden from me. But before I reveal what happened that night and how I transformed the most humiliating moment of my life into the foundation of my greatest success, where are you watching from? Hit subscribe and like this video to discover how one perfectly planned evening changed everything, and why sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply the truth served at exactly the right moment. The restaurant was Le Bernardin, the same intimate French establishment where Richard had proposed to me 13 years earlier. I had chosen it deliberately for our anniversary celebration, believing that returning to the place where our love story began would help us reconnect after months of growing distance and inexplicable tension in our marriage. I had arrived 30 minutes early to ensure our usual table by the window was perfectly arranged, complete with the anniversary gift I had spent weeks selecting and the handwritten letter expressing my hopes for renewing our commitment to each other. The maitre d'Antoine had known us for years and had personally overseen the table preparation. The champagne was chilled, the flowers were arranged precisely as I had requested, and the special menu I had coordinated with the chef featured every dish that held significance in our relationship history. The atmosphere was perfect for the intimate conversation I believed we desperately needed to restore the connection that had sustained us through 12 years of marriage and business partnership. I sat facing the entrance, watching for Richard's arrival while reviewing the notes I had prepared for our discussion about the future. The past 6 months had been challenging for both of us, with his technology consulting firm facing increased competition and my own marketing agency struggling to maintain client relationships amid economic uncertainty. I believed these professional pressures had created the distance between us, and I was prepared to suggest solutions that would strengthen both our marriage and our individual careers. At precisely 7:30, the time we had confirmed that morning, I saw Richard enter the restaurant. However, my anticipation transformed into confusion and then horror as I realized he was not alone. Walking beside him, her hand possessively placed on his arm, was Jessica Morrison, the assistant he had hired 6 months earlier to help manage his expanding client portfolio. She was wearing a stunning black dress that I recognized immediately because I had seen the charge on our joint credit card and assumed Richard had purchased it as a surprise gift for me. The shock of seeing them together was compounded by Richard's behavior as they approached the hostess station. He was not embarrassed or apologetic about arriving with another woman to our anniversary dinner. Instead, he appeared relaxed and confident, speaking animatedly with Jessica while completely ignoring my presence across the dining room. When Antoine approached them to discuss seating arrangements, Richard gestured dismissively toward my table and made a comment that caused both Jessica and the maitre d' to glance in my direction with expressions I could not immediately interpret. The walk across the dining room felt interminable as other diners began to notice the unusual situation developing. Richard approached our table with Jessica still clinging to his arm, her expression a mixture of nervousness and defiant triumph. When they reached the table where I sat surrounded by the romantic preparations I had made for our private celebration, Richard pulled out Jessica's chair with theatrical gallantry before finally acknowledging my presence with a casual nod that suggested I was an acquaintance rather than his wife. "Catherine, I am glad you are here," Richard announced in a voice loud enough to be heard by surrounding tables. "This saves me the trouble of scheduling a separate conversation. I want you to meet Jessica Morrison, who will be taking over as my partner in all aspects of my life, both professional and personal. She has been instrumental in helping me realize that our marriage has been holding back my potential for growth and success." The words hit me with physical force, but what followed was even more devastating. Richard continued his announcement as if he were delivering a business presentation to a room full of colleagues, rather than destroying a 12-year marriage in front of strangers. He explained that he had been planning this transition for months, that Jessica understood his ambitions in ways I never had, and that he had already begun the legal process of dissolving our marriage and business partnership. The papers were filed yesterday, he continued, reaching into his jacket pocket to produce a set of documents that he placed on the table next to my untouched champagne glass. My attorney has ensured that the division of assets reflects the actual contributions each of us made to our respective businesses. You will find that your settlement is quite generous considering the market value of your client list and the outstanding debts your agency has accumulated. Jessica spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed she had already won a contest I did not know we were competing in. Richard has told me so much about you, Catherine. I hope you understand that this is not personal. Sometimes people simply grow in different directions, and it is better for everyone involved when they acknowledge that reality rather than clinging to arrangements that no longer serve their best interests. The casual cruelty of her statement was breathtaking. This woman, who was approximately the same age I had been when Richard and I were married, was lecturing me about relationships while wearing jewelry I recognized as pieces from my own collection that had mysteriously disappeared from our home over the past several months. The necklace around her throat was a vintage piece my grandmother had given me, and the bracelet on her wrist had been my anniversary gift from Richard 2 years earlier. The surrounding diners had abandoned any pretense of privacy, and were openly staring at our table as the drama unfolded. I could hear whispered conversations speculating about the relationships involved, and the shocking public nature of Richard's announcement. Several people had their phones out, and I realized that this humiliation was being documented, and would likely be shared across social media platforms within minutes. However, as the initial shock began to subside, I became aware of details that Richard had not anticipated I would notice. The documents he had placed on the table included letterhead from Patterson and Associates, the law firm that had handled our business incorporations and partnership agreement. I knew from our previous interactions with that firm that they would never have undertaken dissolution proceedings without attempting to contact both parties involved in the partnership. The absence of any communication from them suggested that Richard was either lying about the legal proceedings or had engaged different representation without my knowledge. More significantly, Jessica's behavior suggested a level of familiarity with our personal and financial details that could only have come from extended access to confidential information. Her comments about my business debts and client relationships indicated knowledge that would have required systematic investigation of my private business records. The implications of this unauthorized access would prove crucial to the response I was already beginning to formulate. The anniversary gift I had brought for Richard remained wrapped on the table, a tangible reminder of the naivety that had led me to believe our marriage could be restored through romantic gestures and renewed commitment. The letter I had written expressing my hopes for our future felt pathetic in the context of his calculated betrayal. However, these symbols of my misplaced trust would serve as motivation for the systematic response that this situation demanded. I assume you have reviewed the settlement documents, Richard continued, interpreting my silence as shock rather than strategic thinking. The division is straightforward and reflects the current market conditions affecting both of our industry. Jessica has been invaluable in helping me analyze the financial implications and ensuring that the arrangements are equitable for all parties involved. The revelation that Jessica had participated in analyzing our financial arrangements confirmed my suspicion that this betrayal extended far beyond personal infidelity. The assistant Richard had hired to help manage his client portfolio had apparently been granted access to confidential information about my business operations, our joint financial accounts, and the intellectual property that formed the foundation of both our company. This systematic violation of privacy and professional boundaries suggested planning that extended back months beyond the 6-month timeline Richard had mentioned. The waiter who approached our table to take dinner orders appeared uncomfortable with the obvious tension surrounding our conversation. Richard ordered for both himself and Jessica, with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions for other people, while I remained silent and focused on processing the full implications of what was unfolding. The casual manner in which they discussed menu options and wine selections suggested a level of domestic comfort that could only have developed through extended cohabitation. "We have been living together for 4 months," Jessica announced, apparently interpreting my continued silence as curiosity about their relationship timeline. Richard needed someone who could support his vision for expanding his consulting practice into international markets. The partnership requires dedication that extends beyond traditional business hours, and it became clear that maintaining separate residences was inefficient and counterproductive. The timeline she provided confirmed that their cohabitation had begun during the period when Richard had claimed to be working extended hours to secure new clients and establish partnerships with overseas technology firms. The business trips that had kept him away from home for days at a time had apparently been domestic arrangements that allowed him to establish a parallel life while maintaining the fiction of our marriage. The systematic deception involved in maintaining this dual existence demonstrated planning and commitment that was both impressive and horrifying. The couple seated at the table adjacent to ours had abandoned any pretense of private conversation and were openly listening to Richard's announcement. The woman appeared sympathetic to my situation, while her companion seemed fascinated by the business implications of Richard's revelation. Their attention reminded me that this public humiliation was being witnessed by dozens of people who would undoubtedly share details of the evening with their own social and professional network. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. However, as Richard continued explaining his plans for our asset division and business restructuring, I began to notice inconsistencies in his statements that suggested he had overestimated his understanding of our financial situation. His comments about my business debts indicated knowledge of cash flow challenges that were accurate, but his assumptions about client relationships and contract values revealed significant gaps in his information. More importantly, his confidence about controlling the legal process suggested he was unaware of certain steps I had taken months earlier to protect both personal and business assets. The documents he had placed on the table included partnership dissolution agreements that would require my signature to be legally binding. However, the business structures we had established included provisions specifically designed to prevent unilateral dissolution attempts. The legal protections I had insisted upon during our original incorporation process, which Richard had dismissed as unnecessarily complex, would now serve as safeguards against exactly the type of betrayal he was attempting. "I know this is difficult, Catherine," Richard said, his tone shifting to what he apparently believed was compassionate understanding. "Change is never easy, especially when it involves acknowledging that arrangements we thought were permanent have actually been temporary. However, I am confident that both of us will be happier and more successful when we are free to pursue partnerships that align with our individual goals and capabilities." The patronizing nature of his statement crystallized my understanding of how thoroughly he had underestimated both my intelligence and my preparation for exactly this type of crisis. The months of growing distance in our marriage had not been solely due to professional pressures as I had assumed. Instead, they had provided cover for Richard to conduct the investigation and planning necessary to execute this systematic betrayal. However, his assumption that I had been passive during this period would prove to be his most critical miscalculation. The anniversary dinner I had planned as a celebration of our marriage was transforming into the foundation for a response that would demonstrate the consequences of underestimating someone whose professional expertise included strategic planning and crisis management. The romantic setting I had arranged would become the backdrop for revelations that would expose not only Richard's betrayal but also the illegal activities he had undertaken to support his deception. The dessert I had planned for this evening was not the chocolate soufflé featured on the restaurant's menu. Instead, it was a comprehensive presentation of evidence documenting every aspect of Richard's fraudulent activity and delivered by the private investigator and forensic accountant who were already positioned throughout the restaurant, waiting for my signal to begin the most important business presentation of my career. As Richard and Jessica continued their casual conversation about their future plans, completely unaware of the trap they had walked into, I smiled for the first time that evening and reached for the phone that would initiate the sequence of events that would transform this humiliation into the foundation of my new life. The anniversary dinner was about to become exactly the memorable occasion I had planned, though not in the way Richard had anticipated. The transformation from devastated wife to strategic opponent had taken approximately 30 minutes. The execution of my response would take considerably longer, but by the time dessert was served, Richard's carefully constructed deception would be completely destroyed, and I would walk away with everything he had tried to steal from me, along with damages he had never imagined possible. The most satisfying aspect of what was about to unfold was that every step of my response would be completely legal, thoroughly documented, and precisely calibrated to expose the truth rather than seek revenge. Richard had taught me about betrayal, but I was about to teach him about the consequences of underestimating someone whose professional survival had always depended on being prepared for the unthinkable. The strategic thinking and emotional resilience that would prove essential during that devastating anniversary dinner had been forged decades earlier in the modest suburban home where I learned that survival often required anticipating problems before they became crises. My mother, Victoria Blackwell, was a financial planner who specialized in helping recently divorced women rebuild their economic security after discovering that their husbands had systematically hidden assets and manipulated financial arrangements to their advantage. Victoria's client consultations frequently took place in our living room during evening hours, allowing me to observe the devastating patterns that emerged when intelligent, accomplished women discovered they had been financially betrayed by the men they trusted most completely. The stories varied in their specific details, but the underlying dynamics remained remarkably consistent. Successful partnerships had been undermined through deliberate deception, joint assets had been transferred without consent, and business relationships had been manipulated to benefit one party at the expense of the other. These conversations provided early education in the methods that unscrupulous individuals employ to exploit trust and the systematic approach required to document and recover from financial betrayal. Victoria's clients were not naive or financially illiterate women who had failed to pay attention to their circumstances. Instead, they were professionals, business owners and executives who had discovered that their partners had used their trust and collaborative spirit as weapons against them. The most dangerous betrayals are those that exploit your strengths rather than your weaknesses. Victoria would explain during our private discussions about her work. When someone uses your generosity, your willingness to collaborate, and your desire to build something together as tools to steal from you, the emotional damage often exceeds the financial loss. Recovery requires not only rebuilding your resources, but also learning to trust your own judgment again. Victoria's approach to helping these women extended far beyond traditional financial planning. She collaborated with private investigators who specialized in locating hidden assets, forensic accountants who could trace complex financial transactions, and attorneys who understood the legal strategies necessary to pierce corporate structures designed to shield assets from discovery. Her comprehensive method provided a blueprint for systematic investigation and recovery that would prove invaluable in my own crisis decades later. The professional network that Victoria assembled included specialists whose expertise complemented her financial planning knowledge. Detective Marcus Webb had spent 15 years with the Police Fraud Division before establishing a private investigation practice focused on marital asset concealment. His ability to trace financial transactions through multiple corporate entities and offshore accounts had recovered millions of dollars for clients whose partners believed they had successfully hidden their wealth. Forensic accountant Sarah Chen possessed the technical expertise necessary to analyze complex business structures and identify discrepancies that indicated fraudulent activity. Her reports provided the mathematical precision and legal documentation required to support asset recovery proceedings in court. The combination of Detective Webb's investigative capabilities and Sarah Chen's analytical expertise created a formidable team for uncovering financial deception. Attorney Jennifer Morrison specialized in family law cases involving high-net-worth individuals and complex business relationships. Her understanding of both corporate law and domestic relations procedures allowed her to develop comprehensive strategies that addressed all aspects of financial betrayal. The legal protections she recommended often proved proved crucial for preventing additional asset theft during the investigation and recovery process. My exposure to these professionals during my adolescent years provided practical education in investigation techniques, financial analysis, and legal strategy that would prove essential decades later. However, the most valuable lesson from these experiences was understanding that financial betrayal followed predictable patterns that could be anticipated and countered through systematic preparation and document. The academic foundation that supported this practical education began at Westfield Academy, the private school where I excelled in mathematics, analytical writing, and debate competition. The rigorous curriculum emphasized critical thinking, systematic analysis, and persuasive communication skills that would prove essential for both business success and crisis management. The competitive environment encouraged strategic thinking and preparation that extended beyond academic requirements. My mathematics instructor, Dr. Robert Hayes, was a former investment banker who had transitioned to education after discovering his passion for teaching analytical thinking to young minds. His courses went beyond standard mathematical concepts to include practical applications in business analysis, financial modeling, and risk assessment. The projects he assigned required students to analyze real business scenarios and develop recommendations based on quantitative analysis and strategic thinking. The debate team that I joined during my sophomore year provided training in research methodology, logical argumentation, and persuasive presentation that would prove invaluable throughout my professional career. The coach, Miss Patricia Williams, was a retired attorney who emphasized the importance of thorough preparation, anticipating counter-arguments, and maintaining composure under pressure. The competitive debates required rapid analysis of complex information and the ability to construct compelling arguments based on available evidence. The combination of rigorous academics and competitive extracurricular activities developed confidence in my ability to analyze complex situations and develop effective responses under pressure. However, the most significant influence during these formative years came from observing Victoria's professional practice and understanding the devastating consequences of misplaced trust in intimate relationships. The transition to Columbia University for undergraduate study in business administration provided exposure to formal training in strategic planning, financial analysis, and organizational management. However, the theoretical knowledge gained through academic coursework was enhanced by practical experience gained through internships with companies that required sophisticated analysis and strategic thinking. My summer internship with Morrison Strategic Consulting introduced me to the consulting methodology that would later form the foundation of my own professional practice. The firm specialized in helping established companies navigate competitive challenges through systematic analysis of market conditions, internal capabilities, and strategic options. The projects I supported required comprehensive research, quantitative analysis, and presentation of recommendations to senior executives who demanded both analytical rigor and practical implementation strategy. The internship supervisor, Elizabeth Morrison, was a Harvard MBA who had built her consulting practice through exceptional analytical capabilities and an understanding of organizational dynamics that allowed her to identify solutions others overlooked. Her mentorship extended beyond technical training to include guidance in professional development, client relationship management, and business development strategies that would prove essential for independent practice. Consulting success requires the ability to understand complex situations quickly, identify the most critical issues, and develop solutions that address root causes rather than symptoms, Elizabeth explained during our weekly supervision meeting. The best consultants are those who can see patterns and connections that others miss, then communicate their insights in ways that motivate action rather than simply providing analysis. The methodology Elizabeth taught emphasized systematic investigation, comprehensive data collection, and strategic thinking that considered both immediate challenges and long-term implications. The approach required developing multiple scenarios and contingency plans that would allow clients to respond effectively to various possible outcomes. This systematic approach to strategic planning would prove essential for both professional success and personal crisis management. The graduate program at Wharton Business School provided advanced training in strategic management, financial analysis, and organizational behavior that complemented the practical experience gained through consulting internships. However, The most valuable aspect of the MBA program was exposure to case studies involving business crises and the strategic responses that determined whether companies survived or failed during challenging periods. The crisis management cases that we analyzed included situations where companies faced systematic fraud, competitive threats, regulatory challenges, and leadership failures that threatened their survival. The common elements in successful crisis responses included early recognition of problems, systematic investigation of options, rapid implementation of comprehensive solutions, and communication strategies that maintained stakeholder confidence during difficult periods. Professor David Chen, who taught the strategic management course, was a former McKinsey partner who emphasized the importance of preparation and systematic thinking in addressing both anticipated and unexpected challenges. His approach to crisis management focused on developing comprehensive understanding of potential threats and creating response plans that could be implemented rapidly when circumstances required immediate action. The companies that survive and thrive during crises are those that have invested time and resources in understanding their vulnerabilities and developing response capabilities before they are needed. Professor Chen explained during lectures on crisis management, the most dangerous assumption is that current success guarantees future security. Effective leaders are those who prepare for challenges while hoping they will never be necessary. The business plan development course that I completed during my final semester required creating a comprehensive strategy for launching an independent consulting practice. The project included market analysis, competitive assessment, financial projections, and operational planning that provided a roadmap for transitioning from employee to entrepreneur. However, the most valuable aspect of this exercise was developing contingency plans for various scenarios that might affect business viability. The career path that emerged from this educational foundation led to a position with Sterling and Associates, a boutique consulting firm that specialized in helping mid-sized companies develop strategic responses to competitive challenges and market disruption. The firm's client base included family-owned businesses, professional service firms, and technology companies that required sophisticated analysis but preferred the personalized attention that larger consulting firms could not provide. My role as a senior associate involved leading client engagements that required comprehensive analysis of business challenges and development of strategic recommendations. The projects typically involved several months of investigation, analysis, and solution development, followed by implementation support that ensured recommendations were translated into operational improvement. The work required skills in project management, client relationship building, and team leadership that would prove essential for independent practice. The client relationships that I developed during 5 years with Sterling and Associates included several business owners who became ongoing advisors and referral sources when I established my own consulting practice. These relationships were built through consistent delivery of high-quality analysis and practical recommendations that generated measurable improvements in business performance. The reputation for analytical rigor and strategic thinking that I established during this period would prove crucial for attracting clients to my independent practice. However, the most significant relationship that developed during this period was with Richard Blackwell, the technology consultant who would later become my husband and business partner. Richard's consulting firm specialized in helping companies implement technology solutions that improved operational efficiency and competitive position. Our initial collaboration involved a joint project for a manufacturing client that required both strategic planning and technology implementation expertise. The professional partnership that emerged from this initial collaboration seemed to represent the ideal combination of complementary skills and shared values. Richard's technical expertise and client relationships in the technology sector aligned perfectly with my strategic planning capabilities and experience with operational improvement projects. The joint proposals we developed for potential clients offered comprehensive solutions that neither of us could provide independently. The personal relationship that developed alongside our professional collaboration seemed to be grounded in mutual respect for each other's capabilities and shared commitment to building something meaningful together. Richard appeared to value my analytical skills and strategic thinking, while I admired his technical expertise and entrepreneurial vision. The combination of personal compatibility and professional synergy created the foundation for what I believed would be a lifelong partnership in both business and marriage. The wedding that took place at the Carlisle Country Club 2 years after we met was attended by family, friends, and professional colleagues who viewed our partnership as the ideal combination of personal happiness and business opportunity. The venue was selected for its elegance and historical significance, creating an atmosphere that reflected our shared appreciation for tradition and quality. The celebration included clients and business partners who had benefited from our collaborative approach and were eager to support our combined future endeavors. The honeymoon in Tuscany provided an opportunity to discuss our shared vision for building integrated consulting practices that would offer clients comprehensive solutions spanning both strategic planning and technology implementation. The conversations during those 2 weeks in Italy established the framework for business collaboration that would define the next decade of our professional and personal lives. We developed plans for complementary service offerings, shared client development strategies, and operational integration that would create competitive advantages neither of us could achieve independently. The return to Philadelphia and the establishment of our joint consulting practices seemed to validate every assumption about the potential for successful integration of our personal and professional lives. The first year of marriage generated both business growth and personal satisfaction that exceeded our most optimistic projection. Our combined client base expanded rapidly, referral rates increased significantly, and profit margins improved through operational efficiencies that reduced overhead while enhancing service quality. However, the success that characterized our early years of marriage and business partnership would later provide cover for the systematic deception that Richard was already beginning to plan. The trust and collaboration that made our joint venture successful would become the tools he used to gain access to confidential information and manipulate business relationships for his exclusive benefit. The foundation of analytical thinking and strategic planning that Victoria had helped me develop would prove essential for recognizing and responding to betrayal that exploited the very strengths that had created our initial success. The establishment of Blackwell Strategic Consulting represented the culmination of 7 years of deliberate professional development and strategic relationship building that had prepared me for independent practice in the highly competitive consulting industry. The decision to launch my own required both significant financial investment and comprehensive understanding of market dynamics that would determine whether the venture would succeed or join the substantial percentage of consulting practices that fail within their first 3 years of operation. The business plan that developed during the final months of my employment with Sterling and Associates included detailed market analysis that identified specific opportunities in the Philadelphia metropolitan area for strategic consulting services targeted to mid-sized companies seeking sophisticated analysis without the premium pricing structure of major international consulting firms. The research revealed substantial demand for specialized expertise in strategic planning, competitive analysis, and operational improvement that existing service providers were not addressing effectively. The competitive landscape analysis demonstrated that while several established consulting firms served the regional market, most focused either on large corporate clients that required extensive resources or small businesses that needed basic advisory services. The middle market segment, comprising companies with annual revenues between $10 million and $100 million, represented an underserved opportunity for consultants who could provide sophisticated strategic analysis while maintaining the personalized attention and responsive service delivery that these clients value. The financial projections that supported the business plan incorporated conservative assumptions about client acquisition timelines, project pricing, and operational expenses that would ensure business viability even if market conditions proved more challenging than anticipated. The startup capital requirements included sufficient reserves to maintain operations for 18 months without generating positive cash flow, providing adequate time to establish client relationships and build the reputation necessary for sustainable business development. The legal structure that I established for the consulting practice included provisions specifically designed to protect intellectual property, maintain client confidentiality, and ensure operational flexibility as the business evolved. The corporate formation documents incorporated safeguards that would prevent unauthorized access to client information, proprietary methodologies, and financial records that represented competitive advantages essential for long-term success. The office space that I selected in Center City, Philadelphia, provided the professional environment necessary for client meetings while maintaining cost structure appropriate for a startup consulting practice. The location offered convenient access for regional clients while projecting the competence and stability that potential clients expected from strategic advisors. The lease terms included expansion options that would accommodate business growth without requiring relocation during critical development phases. The first client engagement came through a referral from my former supervisor at Sterling & Associates, who recommended my services to Montgomery Manufacturing, a family-owned industrial equipment company facing competitive pressure from international manufacturers, offering similar products at significantly lower prices. The project required comprehensive analysis of market conditions, internal capabilities, and strategic options for maintaining competitive position in an increasingly challenging environment. The Montgomery Manufacturing engagement represented exactly the type of complex strategic challenge that I had prepared to address through my consulting practice. The company possessed strong technical capabilities and established customer relationships, but lacked the strategic planning expertise necessary to develop comprehensive responses to evolving market conditions. The family ownership structure had created decision-making processes that prioritized consensus over rapid response to competitive threats. The initial project scope included market analysis that examined industry trends, competitive dynamics, and customer requirements that would determine future success factors for companies in Montgomery's market segment. The research revealed significant opportunities for differentiation through specialized product offerings, enhanced customer service capabilities, and strategic partnerships that would provide competitive advantages beyond cost-based competition. The competitive analysis component involved systematic evaluation of both domestic and international competitors to identify their strengths, weaknesses, and likely strategic responses to market change. The research demonstrated that while international competitors offered cost advantages, they lacked the technical expertise and customer service capabilities that Montgomery had developed through decades of specialized focus on industrial application. The internal capability assessment examined Montgomery's operational processes, technical expertise, customer relationships, and financial resources to determine which competitive advantages could be enhanced and which limitations required strategic response. The analysis revealed substantial opportunities for operational improvements that would reduce costs while enhancing product quality and customer satisfaction. The strategic recommendations that emerged from this comprehensive analysis provided Montgomery with a roadmap for maintaining competitive position through differentiation rather than cost competition. The plan included specific initiatives for product development, customer service enhancement, operational improvement, and strategic partnership development that would create sustainable competitive advantage. The implementation support that I provided during the 6 months following presentation of the strategic recommendations ensured that Montgomery's management team possessed the knowledge and resources necessary to execute the plan effectively. The ongoing consultation included regular progress reviews, problem-solving assistance, and strategy refinement based on market feedback and operational experience. The results achieved through this engagement exceeded both my expectations and those of Montgomery's management team. The company successfully implemented the recommended strategic initiatives, achieved significant improvements in operational efficiency, and secured several major contracts that validated the differentiation strategy. The financial performance improvements included increased profit margins, enhanced cash flow, and strengthened competitive position that provided foundation for continued growth. The recognition that followed the Montgomery manufacturing success included referrals to other regional manufacturers facing similar competitive challenges. Word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied clients proved to be the most effective marketing strategy for building the consulting practice, generating new project opportunities faster than traditional business development activities could have achieved. The second major engagement involved Hartwell Financial Services, a regional investment advisory firm seeking to expand their market presence while maintaining the personalized service approach that had distinguished them from larger competitors. The project required analysis of growth opportunities, operational scalability, and competitive positioning that would support sustainable expansion without compromising service quality. The Hartwell engagement introduced me to the financial services industry and the unique challenges faced by firms attempting to compete with both national investment companies and local independent advisors. The research revealed significant opportunities for mid-sized firms that could combine sophisticated investment capabilities with personalized relationship management that neither very large nor very small competitors could match effectively. The strategic plan developed for Hartwell included recommendations for service expansion, operational systematization, technology implementation, and marketing initiatives that would support controlled growth while maintaining the client relationships that formed the foundation of their competitive advantage. The implementation process required 12 months of ongoing consultation to ensure successful execution of the complex operational changes involved. The success of the Hartwell engagement established my reputation in the financial services sector and generated referrals to other regional firms facing similar growth challenges. The expertise developed through this project would later prove valuable for understanding the financial industry dynamics that Richard would attempt to exploit during his systematic betrayal of our marriage and business partnership. The third significant engagement, during my first year of independent practice, involved Riverside Healthcare System, a network of medical practices seeking to improve operational efficiency while maintaining quality patient care during a period of increasing regulatory requirements and insurance reimbursement pressure. The healthcare industry presented unique challenges that required understanding of both business strategy and medical practice operation. The Riverside project required collaboration with medical professionals, administrative staff, and regulatory specialists to develop comprehensive solutions that addressed multiple stakeholder requirements simultaneously. The complexity of healthcare operations demanded systematic analysis of clinical workflows, administrative processes, regulatory compliance requirements, and financial management practices that influenced overall organizational effectiveness. The strategic recommendations developed for Riverside included operational improvements that enhanced patient care quality while reducing administrative burden on medical staff. The implementation process required careful change management to ensure that operational modifications supported rather than interfered with clinical excellence that represented the organization's primary mission. The success of the Riverside engagement demonstrated my ability to work effectively in highly regulated industries, where strategic decisions required balancing multiple competing priorities and stakeholder requirements. The healthcare expertise developed through this project expanded my consulting capabilities and provided access to a market segment that offered significant opportunities for continued business development. The recognition that my consulting practice received during the first 18 months of operation included selection as a finalist for the Philadelphia Business Journal's Emerging Entrepreneur Award, which provided regional visibility and credibility that accelerated business development efforts. The award recognition was based on demonstrated business growth, client satisfaction, and contribution to the regional business community through job creation and economic development. The networking opportunities that accompanied this recognition introduced me to other successful entrepreneurs and business leaders who became sources of referrals, strategic advice, and collaborative opportunity. The professional relationships developed through these interactions would prove valuable throughout my career and would later provide crucial support during the crisis created by Richard's betrayal. The financial performance of Blackwell Strategic Consulting during the initial years exceeded the projections included in the original business plan. The revenue growth was driven by client referrals, project expansion with existing clients, and geographic expansion to serve companies throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. The profit margins remained strong due to operational efficiency and pricing strategy that reflected the value delivered to clients rather than simply competing on cost. The operational success of the consulting practice provided foundation for the personal relationship that developed with Richard Blackwell during our collaboration on joint client projects. Our professional partnership began when Montgomery Manufacturing required both strategic consulting and technology implementation services to execute the operational improvements that had been recommended through my initial engagement with them. Richard's technology consulting firm Blackwell Systems Integration specialized in helping manufacturing companies implement enterprise software solutions that improved operational efficiency and management reporting capability. His expertise in manufacturing systems complemented my strategic planning capabilities, creating opportunities for comprehensive client solutions that neither of us could provide independently. The collaborative approach that we developed for serving shared clients demonstrated the potential for integrated consulting services that addressed both strategic and operational requirements through coordinated project management. The client feedback indicated strong preference for working with consulting partners who could provide seamless coordination rather than managing separate relationships with multiple service providers. The professional respect that developed through these joint engagements evolved into personal attraction based on shared values, compatible working styles, and mutual appreciation for each other's expertise and accomplishments. Richard appeared to understand and value the strategic thinking capabilities that I brought to client engagements, while I admired his technical expertise and systematic approach to problem-solving in complex operational environments. The personal compatibility that we discovered extended beyond professional collaboration to include shared interest in travel, cultural activities, and intellectual pursuits that provided foundation for relationship development outside the business context. The combination of professional synergy and personal compatibility created what appeared to be ideal circumstances for building both business partnership and personal relationships simultaneously. The courtship that followed our initial professional collaboration was characterized by thoughtful gestures and meaningful conversations that suggested genuine interest in building substantive long-term relationship rather than casual romantic involvement. Richard demonstrated understanding of my professional priorities and career ambitions, while sharing his own vision for business growth and personal achievement that seemed compatible with my own objectives. The engagement that Richard proposed 18 months after our first joint client project took place during a weekend trip to Napa Valley that combined business networking with personal relationship development. The proposal was both romantic and practical, reflecting understanding of my personality and values, while expressing commitment to building shared future that would integrate our personal and professional aspirations. The wedding planning process provided opportunities to observe Richard's approach to decision-making, financial management, and relationship dynamics that would prove significant in retrospect. His preferences for control over planning details and his tendency to make unilateral decisions about arrangements that affected both of us should have served as warning signs about future relationship challenges. However, the success and recognition that both of our consulting practices were achieving during this period created an atmosphere of optimism and confidence that overshadowed potential concerns about compatibility and communication patterns. The professional achievements that we were accomplishing individually and collaboratively seemed to validate every assumption about our potential for building successful integrated life together. The business integration that we implemented following our marriage included operational coordination, shared client development, and financial consolidation that created efficiencies and competitive advantages for both consulting practice. The combined service offerings attracted larger clients and more complex projects that generated increased revenue and enhanced professional recognition for both of us. The success of our integrated consulting approach during the first 3 years of marriage established us as a prominent business partnership in the regional consulting market. The reputation for delivering comprehensive solutions and exceptional client service created demand that exceeded our capacity to serve, requiring careful client selection and project prioritization that maintained quality while maximizing business growth opportunities. The transformation of our marriage and business partnership from collaborative success to systematic deception occurred gradually enough that individual changes seemed manageable and logical within the context of expanding business opportunities and evolving market demand. The comfort and security that accompanied our professional achievements created an environment where subtle shifts in behavior and priorities could be rationalized as natural adaptations to increased responsibilities and enhanced market position. The first indication that something fundamental was changing in our relationship dynamics emerged during the 4th year of our marriage, when Richard began expressing frustration with what he characterized as inefficiencies in our collaborative decision-making process. His complaints initially focused on legitimate operational concerns about the time required to coordinate client strategies and project timelines when both of our firms were involved in joint engagement. Richard's proposed solutions emphasized streamlined communication and clearer divisions of responsibility that would allow each of us to make decisions within our areas of expertise, without requiring extensive consultation with the other partner. The logic of these suggestions seemed sound from an operational efficiency perspective, and I initially supported modifications that would reduce administrative burden while maintaining the quality of client service that had established our combined reputation. However, the implementation of these efficiency measures gradually created information silos that reduced my visibility into Richard's client relationships and project activity. The shared project management systems that had previously provided comprehensive oversight of all joint engagements were replaced with individual tracking methods that limited cross-visibility to summary-level information rather than detailed operational data. The financial consolidation that had characterized our early business integration also began to evolve toward greater separation under the justification of improved accounting clarity and tax optimization. Richard's accountant recommended establishing distinct business entities that would provide better liability protection and tax advantages, while maintaining operational coordination through contractual relationships rather than direct financial integration. The legal restructuring that accompanied these changes required extensive documentation and regulatory filings that Richard volunteered to coordinate through his existing professional service relationship. His willingness to manage these complex administrative requirements seemed generous and practical, given his familiarity with the legal and accounting professionals involved in the reorganization process. However, the new corporate structures that emerged from this reorganization provided Richard with significantly more control over financial flows and operational decisions than had existed under our previous arrangement. The contractual relationships that replaced direct financial integration included provisions that gave his firm primary responsibility for client relationship management and project coordination, with my consulting services being subcontracted through his organization. The practical effect of these changes was to reduce my direct contact with many of our joint clients, while increasing Richard's authority over project scope, timeline, and financial arrangement. The modification was presented as a streamlined approach that would improve client experience by providing single point of contact management, while maintaining my involvement in strategic analysis and recommendation development. The increased travel schedule that Richard adopted during this period was explained as necessary for developing relationships with potential clients in markets outside our established geographic base. His technology consulting services were particularly suited to national client development, since implementation projects could be managed remotely once initial relationship development and systems analysis were completed. The business trips that initially occurred monthly gradually increased in frequency and duration, with Richard spending multiple weeks each month in cities including Atlanta, Dallas, and Denver, where he claimed to be developing partnerships with regional technology firms and establishing client relationships that would provide substantial growth opportunities for both of our consulting practices. The travel-related expenses that appeared on our business credit card statements reflected high-quality accommodations and dining that Richard justified as necessary for establishing credibility with prospective clients and partners in competitive markets. The investment in relationship development seemed reasonable given the potential returns from expanded geographic market access. However, the specific business outcomes from these extensive travel investments remained vague, despite my requests for detailed progress reports on client development activities and partnership negotiations. Richard's explanations consistently emphasized the long-term nature of relationship building in professional services and the confidentiality requirements that prevented detailed disclosure of client discussions and partnership negotiations. The communication patterns that developed during Richard's frequent absence periods also began to change in ways that reduced our connection and shared understanding of business development.
The daily conversations about client projects and strategic opportunities that had characterized our early business collaboration were replaced by brief check-ins focused on immediate operational requirements rather than comprehensive business planning. The evening discussions about long-term business strategy and personal goals that had strengthened our partnership during the early years of marriage became infrequent and superficial. Richard's explanation that travel fatigue and time zone changes made detailed business discussions difficult seemed reasonable, and I initially accepted reduced communication as a temporary adjustment to increased business demand. The social relationships that had provided support and perspective during our early years of marriage also began to deteriorate as Richard's travel schedule conflicted with community events and social commitments that had previously been important to both of us. The professional networking activities that had generated referrals and business development opportunities for both of our firms were increasingly attended by me alone, with Richard's absence explained by unavoidable client commitment. The friends and colleagues who had witnessed our early collaborative success began expressing subtle concerns about the changes they observed in our relationship dynamic. Their comments typically focused on Richard's increased absence from social and professional events, rather than direct criticism of our marriage, but the pattern of concern suggested that others were noticing changes that I was rationalizing or minimizing. The financial performance of my own consulting practice remained strong during this period, with continued client growth and project expansion that validated the strategic planning capabilities that had established my professional reputation. However, the collaboration with Richard's firm that had previously generated substantial revenue through joint engagements began to decline as his focus shifted toward independently managed projects in distant markets. The reduced collaboration meant that I was increasingly dependent on individual client development rather than the shared business development that had accelerated growth during our early partnership year. While my consulting practice remained financially viable, the growth trajectory had slowed compared to the rapid expansion that had characterized our integrated approach. The technology requirements for my consulting practice also began to require substantial investment in systems and capabilities that had previously been shared with Richard's firm. The cost of independent technology infrastructure reduced profit margins while requiring attention to operational details that had previously been managed through our collaborative arrangement. During this period of evolving business and personal dynamics, I maintained focus on client service and business development, while attempting to adapt to Richard's changing availability and priorities. The professional success that my consulting practice continued to achieve provided confidence that any temporary disruptions in our collaborative arrangement would be resolved as Richard's new business development efforts began generating the returns he anticipated. The comfort zone that successful consulting practices can create also contributed to my reduced vigilance regarding the warning signs that were becoming increasingly apparent. The financial security and professional recognition that I had achieved made it easy to rationalize concerning developments as temporary challenges rather than indicators of fundamental problems requiring immediate attention.
The professional development activities that had previously been important for maintaining competitive capabilities were reduced due to increased client demands and the administrative burden of managing independent business operations. The industry conferences and training programs that had provided exposure to emerging trends and networking opportunities were postponed or eliminated to focus on immediate client requirements. The strategic planning that had been essential for establishing and growing my consulting practice also became less systematic, as current client relationships provided sufficient business volume to maintain operations without aggressive expansion efforts. The comprehensive market analysis and competitive assessment that had guided earlier business decisions were replaced by reactive responses to immediate opportunities and challenges. The administrative systems that supported client project management and business operations were functioning effectively but had not been updated or enhanced to reflect best practices that were being adopted by other successful consulting firms. The technology infrastructure that had been adequate for earlier business volumes was becoming insufficient for managing increased client loads and project complexity. The legal protections and business structures that had been established during the early years of my consulting practice had not been reviewed or updated to reflect changes in business size, market conditions, or partnership arrangements. The insurance coverage and liability protections that had seemed adequate for smaller operations might not provide sufficient protection for current business activities and potential risks. The personal financial management that had been systematic and conservative during the early years of our marriage had become less disciplined as increased income and business success created false confidence about long-term financial security. The budget monitoring and investment planning that had been important during periods of uncertainty were reduced as current cash flow seemed to eliminate immediate financial concern. The estate planning and asset protection strategies that my mother had emphasized as essential for anyone building substantial professional practices had been postponed indefinitely despite repeated reminders about the importance of legal protections for successful business owners. The complexity and cost of comprehensive legal planning seemed unnecessary given our apparent financial stability and business success. The communication patterns with my mother, Victoria, whose professional expertise in helping women recover from financial betrayal should have provided valuable perspective on concerning developments, had become less frequent and less substantive. The demands of managing an independent consulting practice while adapting to Richard's changing availability limited time for family relationships that had previously provided guidance and support. The relationship maintenance activities that had strengthened our marriage during the early years, including regular date nights, weekend getaways, and shared hobby activities, were increasingly postponed due to Richard's travel schedule and my increased client commitment. The investment in relationship building that had been important for maintaining emotional connection was sacrificed to immediate business demand. The anniversary celebration planning that I had begun 6 months before our 12th anniversary dinner represented an attempt to restore the romantic connection and shared vision that had characterized our early relationship. The elaborate arrangements and thoughtful details that I incorporated into the evening were intended to demonstrate my commitment to rebuilding our partnership, despite the challenges created by evolving business demands. The surprise gift that I had selected for Richard was a vintage watch that had belonged to his grandfather, purchased through estate sale channels after months of research to locate the specific timepiece he had described as having special meaning during his childhood. The gesture was intended to show my attention to details that mattered to him and my commitment to honoring family traditions that had shaped his values. The restaurant reservation at Le Bernardin was made 3 months in advance to ensure availability on our anniversary date, with special arrangements for a private table and customized menu that would create the intimate atmosphere necessary for meaningful conversation about our future together. The planning process included coordination with the restaurant staff to ensure every detail would contribute to a memorable evening. The letter that I had written to accompany the anniversary gift expressed my recognition of the challenges we had faced during recent years, while reaffirming my commitment to working together to rebuild the collaboration and mutual support that had made our early marriage successful. The content was carefully crafted to acknowledge legitimate concerns while focusing on positive possibilities for renewed partnership. However, the extensive planning and emotional investment that I had devoted to the anniversary celebration would be completely wasted on an evening that would instead expose the full extent of Richard's systematic betrayal and the calculated nature of the deception he had been implementing for months. The romantic reconnection that I had hoped to achieve would be replaced by the devastating realization that the man I had trusted completely had been methodically planning my professional and financial destruction. The systematic investigation that would expose the full scope of Richard's deception began 3 weeks before our anniversary dinner, when I received an unexpected phone call from Margaret Chen, the Chief Financial Officer of Riverside Healthcare Systems, one of our most significant joint clients. Her voice carried an unusual tension that immediately indicated the conversation would address concerns beyond routine project administration or scheduling adjustment. Margaret's inquiry initially seemed to involve a simple administrative discrepancy regarding invoice processing and payment allocation for consulting services that both Richard's firm and my practice had provided during the previous 6 months. However, her specific questions about project scope and billing arrangements revealed inconsistencies that suggested more serious problems with the financial management of our joint engagement. The documentation that Margaret requested included detailed breakdowns of services provided, time allocation records, and expense reports that would clarify how project costs had been distributed between strategic consulting and technology implementation components. Her request seemed reasonable from an accounting perspective, but the urgency and specificity of her requirements suggested that Riverside's internal audit process had identified discrepancies requiring immediate investigation. The financial records that I compiled in response to Margaret's request revealed billing patterns that were significantly different from the project arrangements that Richard and I had discussed during our engagement planning meeting. The invoices that had been submitted to Riverside reflected substantial charges for technology consulting services that exceeded the scope of work that had been authorized during our initial project development discussion. More disturbing was the discovery that Richard's billing included charges for strategic consulting services that my firm had supposedly provided, but for which I had no records of actual work performed or client interaction. The documentation suggested that Richard had been billing Riverside for my consulting time while either performing the work himself or subcontracting it to other consultants without my knowledge or authorization. The expense reports associated with the Riverside engagement included charges for travel, accommodation, and client entertainment that far exceeded the budget allocations that had been established during project planning. The expenses appeared to include costs for activities and locations that were not related to the Riverside project, suggesting that Richard had been using this client's budget to fund other business or personal activity. The timeline analysis that I conducted revealed that many of the charges attributed to my consulting services had been billed during periods when I was working on other client projects and had no availability for additional Riverside activity. The billing records indicated that I had supposedly provided strategic analysis and client consultation during weeks when my calendar showed full commitment to other consulting engagement. The client communication records that I maintained for all consulting projects included no correspondence with Riverside personnel regarding the strategic consulting activities that Richard had billed to their account. The absence of email exchanges, meeting notes, or project deliverables that would normally document consulting services suggested that the billed activities had not occurred as represented in Richard's invoices. The realization that Richard had been systematically billing clients for services that I had not provided created immediate concerns about both professional liability and potential legal exposure. The misrepresentation of consulting services could constitute fraud if the pattern extended beyond simple billing errors, and my professional reputation could be severely damaged if clients discovered that they had been charged for services that were not delivered as represented. The investigation that I initiated to determine the scope of the billing irregularities revealed that similar patterns existed in the financial records for multiple joint client engagements. The documentation showed consistent instances where Richard had billed clients for my consulting time without my knowledge, had inflated expense reports to include unrelated costs, and had charged premium rates for services that were either not provided or were delivered by less qualified personnel. The financial analysis that I conducted indicated that Richard had systematically overcharged joint clients by approximately 40% above the actual value of services provided, with the excess charges being attributed to my consulting firm despite my lack of participation in generating the inflated invoices. The pattern suggested deliberate misrepresentation rather than administrative errors or misunderstandings about project scope. The client relationship implications of this systematic overbilling were potentially devastating for both our professional reputations and the long-term viability of our consulting practice. The trust that clients placed in consulting relationships was fundamental to business success, and any discovery of financial misrepresentation could permanently damage the credibility that had taken years to establish through consistent, ethical behavior and quality service delivery. The legal research that I conducted regarding professional liability and fraud exposure indicated that I could face significant financial penalties and professional sanctions if clients or regulatory authorities determined that I had participated in or benefited from the systematic overbill. The professional licensing requirements for strategic consultants included strict ethical standards that could result in license suspension or revocation for financial misconduct. The insurance coverage that protected my consulting practice included professional liability protection, but the policy exclusions specifically eliminated coverage for fraudulent activities or intentional misrepresentation. The discovery that Richard had been engaging in systematic billing fraud meant that my business insurance would not provide protection against client claims or regulatory enforcement actions related to his misconduct. The forensic accounting analysis that I commissioned, through a specialist recommended by my mother's professional network, revealed that Richard's financial manipulation extended far beyond simple overbilling of joint clients. The investigation uncovered evidence of systematic fund transfers from joint business accounts into personal accounts that Richard controlled exclusively, asset purchases that had been charged to business expenses but were used for personal benefit, and complex financial arrangements that had been designed to shift business income away from jointly managed accounts. The asset transfer analysis showed that Richard had systematically moved valuable business resources, including client databases, proprietary methodologies, and technology systems, into corporate entities that he controlled exclusively. The transfers had been structured to appear as routine business transactions, but the cumulative effect was to concentrate most of the valuable assets from our joint business activities under Richard's sole control. The client relationship audit that the forensic accountant conducted revealed that Richard had been systematically redirecting business opportunities and client relationships away from our joint engagements toward projects that benefited his firm exclusively. The analysis showed that several major clients, who had initially engaged both of our firms for collaborative projects, had gradually shifted their business to Richard's firm alone. Apparently based on his recommendations that technology consulting was more critical than strategic planning for their operational requirement. The timeline analysis that documented these client relationship changes showed that the systematic redirection of business opportunities had begun approximately 18 months earlier, coinciding with the period when Richard had begun expressing concerns about operational efficiency and had proposed the business restructuring that reduced my involvement in joint client management. The pattern suggested that the efficiency concerns had been pretexts for gaining greater control over client relationships and revenue streams. The financial impact analysis indicated that the systematic redirection of business opportunities had cost my consulting practice approximately $200,000 in revenue during the previous 18 months, while Richard's firm had gained substantially more than that amount through the clients and projects that had been transferred away from joint management. The manipulation had effectively stolen significant business value, while making the theft appear to be natural business evolution. The personal financial investigation that I commissioned revealed that Richard had also been systematically manipulating our joint personal accounts and investments to shift assets into accounts that he controlled exclusively. The analysis showed patterns of fund transfers, investment changes, and expense allocations that had gradually moved substantial wealth away from jointly managed resources toward accounts that were in Richard's name alone. The real estate analysis showed that Richard had been making mortgage payments and property tax payments for our jointly owned home using funds from my business accounts rather than from joint personal accounts or his own business income. The manipulation meant that I had been unknowingly funding the ownership of assets that were legally structured to benefit both of us equally, while Richard had been preserving his own business income for purposes that were not disclosed to me. The investment account analysis revealed that Richard had been liquidating jointly owned securities and transferring the proceeds into investment accounts that were in his name exclusive. The transactions had been structured to appear as routine portfolio rebalancing activities, but the cumulative effect was to transfer substantial wealth away from joint ownership toward Richard's exclusive control. The insurance policy analysis showed that Richard had modified the beneficiary designations on several substantial life insurance policies without my knowledge, removing me as the primary beneficiary and replacing me with Gajexi Morrison or trust accounts that Richard controlled. The changes had been made using forged signatures and fraudulent documentation that could constitute multiple felony violations. The credit account analysis revealed that Richard had been systematically using joint credit accounts and business credit lines to fund activities that benefited him exclusively, including travel expenses for business trips that appeared to be personal vacations with Jessica Morrison, luxury purchases that had been claimed as business expenses but were used for personal purposes, and investment activities that had been charged to business accounts
but generated returns that flowed to Richard's personal accounts exclusively. The legal analysis that accompanied the forensic accounting investigation indicated that Richard's activities constituted multiple violations of both civil and criminal law, including fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The systematic nature of the financial manipulation and the sophisticated methods used to conceal the theft suggested premeditation and planning that could result in substantial legal penalties if prosecuted successfully. The evidence documentation that the forensic accountant provided included detailed financial records, transaction histories, and legal analysis that would support both civil recovery proceedings and criminal prosecution if I chose to pursue legal remedy. The comprehensive nature of the evidence package meant that Richard's denials or attempts to explain the financial discrepancies would be difficult to sustain under legal scrutiny. The personal relationship implications of discovering this systematic financial betrayal were initially overwhelming. The realization that someone I had trusted completely had been methodically stealing from me for at least 18 months created emotional devastation that was compounded by the professional implications of the misconduct. The combination of personal betrayal and professional liability created a crisis that threatened both my marriage and my business simultaneously. The strategic planning that I began immediately upon receiving the forensic accounting report focused on protecting my remaining assets, minimizing my legal exposure from Richard's fraudulent activities, and developing a comprehensive response that would expose his misconduct while preserving my professional reputation and business viability. The planning process required coordination among legal counsel, financial advisors, and investigation specialists to ensure that my response would be both effective and legally appropriate. The timeline that I established for implementing my response strategy required careful coordination to ensure that Richard would not have advance warning that would allow him to destroy evidence or transfer additional assets beyond recovery. The plan included provisions for preserving documentation, securing financial accounts, and preparing legal proceedings that could be initiated immediately when the appropriate moment arrived. The anniversary dinner that Richard had agreed to attend represented the ideal opportunity to implement the confrontation phase of my response strategy. The public setting would prevent Richard from becoming violent or destructive when presented with evidence of his misconduct, while the presence of witnesses would ensure that his reactions and statements would be documented for potential legal proceeding. The dessert that I had planned for that evening would include not only the forensic accounting report documenting Richard's systematic theft and fraud, but also the presence of Detective Webb and Attorney Morris, who would be positioned throughout the restaurant to ensure that the presentation of evidence occurred under conditions that would support subsequent legal proceedings. The romantic anniversary celebration that Richard expected would instead become the comprehensive exposure of his criminal activities and the beginning of his complete professional and personal destruction. The initial 24 hours following the discovery of Richard's systematic financial fraud created a psychological and emotional crisis that challenged every assumption I had maintained about trust, partnership, and the fundamental nature of our 12-year marriage. The comprehensive evidence that Detective Webb and the forensic accounting team had assembled left no possibility for alternative explanations or innocent misunderstanding. Yet my mind struggled to reconcile the mathematical certainty of Richard's criminal activities with the personal history we had shared. The cognitive dissonance that accompanied this revelation was unlike any professional or personal challenge I had previously encountered. The analytical capabilities that had established my consulting career demanded acceptance of the documented evidence, while the emotional investment that had sustained our marriage for over a decade created powerful resistance to acknowledging the systematic nature of Richard's betrayal. The conflict between rational analysis and emotional denial created a state of psychological paralysis that made strategic decision-making extraordinarily difficult. The immediate practical implications of the financial fraud discovery required urgent action to prevent additional asset theft and minimize legal exposure from Richard's continued misconduct. The forensic accountant had identified several ongoing financial transfers that would continue to drain jointly managed accounts unless immediate intervention occurred. The legal counsel that my mother had recommended emphasized that delayed response could be interpreted as passive acceptance of the fraudulent activities, potentially complicating recovery efforts and increasing personal liability exposure. However, the emotional processing required to accept the full implications of Richard's betrayal created resistance to implementing the aggressive legal and financial protections that the evidence clearly justified. The acknowledgement that the person I had trusted most completely had been systematically stealing from me for over 18 months required fundamental revision of my understanding of both our relationship and my own judgment capability. The implications extended far beyond financial losses to include questions about my competence in evaluating character and managing personal relations. The professional reputation concerns that accompanied this personal crisis added additional layers of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. The client relationships that formed the foundation of my consulting practice had been built through consistent demonstration of ethical behavior, analytical competence, and reliable judgment. The discovery that I had been unknowingly involved in systematic client fraud, through Richard's billing manipulation, threatened to destroy the professional credibility that had required years to establish. The immediate client notification requirements presented particularly challenging decisions about disclosure timing and communication strategy. The legal counsel advised that clients who had been overcharged through Richard's fraudulent billing practices had legal rights to full disclosure and financial recovery, regardless of my lack of knowledge about the misconduct. However, the timing and manner of these disclosures would significantly impact both client relationships and potential legal proceedings against Rich. The decision to delay client notifications until after the anniversary dinner confrontation reflected strategic planning that prioritized comprehensive evidence preservation over immediate transparency. The legal team had advised that premature disclosure could prompt Richard to destroy additional evidence or transfer remaining assets beyond recovery, potentially reducing the overall effectiveness of civil and criminal proceedings. The 3-week delay required for complete investigation represented an acceptable compromise between legal strategy and ethical obligations to affected clients. The personal relationship dynamics that complicated this crisis included the necessity of maintaining normal interaction patterns with Richard, while simultaneously preparing comprehensive legal action against him. The investigation and evidence gathering required for effective prosecution demanded absolute secrecy about my knowledge of his fraudulent activity. The psychological burden of pretending continued trust and affection while planning his professional and personal destruction created extraordinary emotional stress. The acting skills that this deception required were unlike any challenge I had previously encountered in either professional or personal context. The consulting work that had established my career involved honest analysis and transparent communication with clients who relied on my expertise for critical business decisions. The necessity of maintaining systematic deception with the person who shared my home and bed created cognitive and emotional conflicts that tested my psychological resilience. The sleep disruption that accompanied this psychological pressure began within hours of receiving the forensic accounting report and continued throughout the 3-week preparation period leading to the anniversary dinner. The detailed evidence documentation that I reviewed each evening provided undeniable confirmation of Richard's criminal activities, while the daytime interactions that required pretending continued trust and affection created surreal disconnection from emotional reality. The appetite changes and physical symptoms that accompanied the emotional processing included digestive problems, tension headaches, and muscle pain that reflected the extraordinary stress created by managing this complex crisis while maintaining normal professional and personal routine. The physical manifestations of psychological trauma provided additional evidence of the comprehensive nature of Richard's betrayal and its impact on my overall well-being. The support system that I had previously relied upon for guidance during challenging periods was not available for this particular crisis due to the necessity of maintaining absolute confidentiality about the investigation and planned legal proceeding. The professional colleagues who had provided business advice and personal friends who had offered emotional support during previous difficulties could not be informed about the situation without risking disclosure that might compromise the legal strategy. The isolation that resulted from these confidentiality requirements created additional psychological burden during a period when emotional support would have been particularly valuable. The strategic planning and evidence gathering that occupied most of my available time provided distraction from emotional processing, but did not address the fundamental trauma created by discovering that my most trusted relationship had been based on systematic deception and exploitation. The mother's professional expertise in helping women recover from financial betrayal provided the only available source of experienced guidance during this crisis. However, even these conversations required careful limitation to avoid compromising the investigation or legal strategy that was being developed. The knowledge that Victoria had observed similar patterns of betrayal in dozens of other cases provided perspective that was both comforting and disturbing. The patterns that Victoria identified in Richard's behavior matched those of other men who had systematically exploited trust relationships for financial gain. The gradual isolation of victims from support networks, the systematic transfer of assets to exclusive control, the use of professional relationships to facilitate theft, and the eventual replacement of the victim with a younger partner who was complicit in the criminal activities were all consistent with documented cases of sophisticated financial abuse. The statistical information that Victoria provided about recovery outcomes for victims of systematic financial betrayal offered both hope and realistic assessment of the challenges that lay ahead. The cases that achieved complete asset recovery and successful criminal prosecution typically involved victims who discovered the theft early, maintained detailed financial records, and implemented comprehensive legal responses before significant additional losses occurred. The preparation that I had been able to complete during the 3-week investigation period placed my case within the category most likely to achieve favorable outcome. The business continuity planning that I developed during this period focused on protecting client relationships and maintaining operational effectiveness despite the personal crisis and anticipated legal proceeding. The consulting practice that had provided both financial security and professional identity needed protection from the reputation damage that could result from association with Richard's criminal activity. The client communication strategy that I developed included detailed explanations of my role as victim rather than participant in Richard's fraudulent billing practices, along with comprehensive plans for financial restitution to clients who had been overcharged through his misconduct.
The proactive approach to acknowledging problems and providing solutions would demonstrate ethical commitment while differentiating my practice from Richard's criminal enterprise. The operational modifications that I implemented included enhanced financial controls, improved documentation procedures, and systematic audit processes that would prevent future exploitation of trust relationships by business partners or colleagues. The systemic improvements that emerged from this crisis would ultimately strengthen my consulting practice while providing protection against similar betrayals in the future. The legal strategy development that occupied much of my time during this period involved coordination among multiple specialists who would each play specific roles in the comprehensive response to Richard's criminal activities. The civil litigation team would focus on asset recovery and financial restitution, while the criminal prosecution specialists would work with law enforcement to ensure appropriate legal penalties for the fraudulent conduct. The private investigation team that had uncovered the initial evidence continued expanding their documentation to include additional financial transactions, communication records, and behavioral patterns that would support both civil and criminal proceedings. The systematic approach to evidence gathering would ensure that Richard's potential legal defenses would be addressed proactively rather than requiring reactive responses during litigation. The asset protection measures that I implemented during this period included transferring remaining jointly held resources to accounts that Richard could not access, securing valuable personal property that might be subject to legal seizure, and establishing financial structures that would protect my legitimate business assets from potential claims related to Richard's criminal activities. The insurance claim preparation that began during this period included documentation of financial losses, professional liability exposure, and emotional damages that might be recoverable through various insurance policies. The comprehensive nature of Richard's betrayal had created multiple categories of loss that required different types of documentation and legal analysis for optimal recovery outcome. The anniversary dinner planning that continued throughout this period took on psychological significance that extended far beyond the strategic importance of the planned confrontation. The elaborate preparations that I had originally intended as romantic gestures became symbols of the relationship investment that Richard had systematically exploited for criminal purposes. The transformation of the anniversary celebration into a public exposure of his betrayal represented poetic justice that provided emotional satisfaction alongside strategic advantage. The restaurant coordination that was required for the planned confrontation included discreet arrangements with management and staff that would ensure appropriate documentation of the evening's events, while maintaining the appearance of normal anniversary celebration until the confrontation phase began. The cooperation that Antoine and other restaurant personnel provided reflected their professional commitment to supporting what they understood to be legal proceedings rather than personal revenge. The emotional preparation that this period required involved developing psychological strategies for maintaining composure during the anticipated confrontation, while ensuring that Richard's reactions and statements would be properly documented for subsequent legal proceedings. The training that Detective Webb provided in interview techniques and evidence preservation would prove essential for maximizing the legal value of Richard's expected admissions and denial. The financial analysis that I completed during this period revealed that Richard's systematic theft had cost me approximately $400,000 in direct losses, with additional opportunity costs and professional liability exposure that could potentially double the total financial impact. The magnitude of these losses transformed the situation from marriage crisis to major financial crime that required comprehensive legal response for adequate protection of my interest. The timeline revision that these calculations necessitated included acceleration of certain legal filings and financial protections to prevent additional losses during the period required for complete legal resolution. The strategic planning that had initially focused on single confrontation event expanded to include extended legal campaign that would continue for months beyond the anniversary dinner exposure. The psychological preparation for this extended conflict included building support systems and coping strategies that would sustain effectiveness throughout a complex legal battle while maintaining the professional performance necessary for continued consulting practice. The recognition that recovery would require sustained effort over many months, rather than single dramatic victory, required fundamental adjustment of expectations and strategic planning. The period between discovering the comprehensive scope of Richard's financial fraud and implementing the anniversary dinner confrontation represented the most psychologically challenging phase of my entire professional and personal life. The systematic deception that I was required to maintain while continuing normal marital interactions created extraordinary emotional strain that tested every coping mechanism I had developed throughout decades of managing complex business crises and personal challenges. The daily routine that I established during these 3 weeks involved compartmentalization strategies that allowed me to function effectively in professional settings while managing the overwhelming emotional burden of planning my husband's complete destruction. The morning hours were dedicated to client work and business operations that required normal analytical thinking and strategic problem-solving capability. The afternoon periods focused on coordination with legal counsel, private investigators, and forensic accountants who were preparing the comprehensive case against Richard's criminal activity. The evening interactions with Richard required the most sophisticated deception that I had ever attempted in any context. The necessity of maintaining affectionate behavior while possessing detailed documentation of his systematic theft created cognitive dissonance that was physically and emotionally exhausting. The conversations about daily activities, future plans, and relationship concerns required constant monitoring to avoid revealing knowledge that would compromise the investigation or provide Richard with opportunities to destroy evidence or transfer additional assets. The sleep disruption that accompanied this psychological pressure intensified throughout the 3-week period, with recurring nightmares that combined financial devastation scenarios with images of public humiliation and professional ruin. The subconscious processing of the comprehensive betrayal created anxiety dreams that reflected fears about client relationships, legal complications, and social ostracism that could result from association with Richard's criminal enterprise. The physical manifestations of sustained stress included digestive problems that made eating regular meals difficult, tension headaches that required prescription medication for management, and muscle pain that reflected the constant psychological vigilance necessary for maintaining successful deception. The medical symptoms provided tangible evidence of the comprehensive nature of the trauma while creating additional challenges for maintaining professional effectiveness during client engagement. The isolation that resulted from confidentiality requirements eliminated most of the social and professional support systems that had previously provided guidance during challenging periods. The colleagues who had offered business advice during previous crises could not be informed about the situation without risking disclosure that might compromise legal strategy. The friends who had provided emotional support during difficult periods were excluded from knowledge that would allow them to offer meaningful assistance during this unprecedented crisis. The professional relationships that had sustained my consulting practice through previous challenges became sources of additional stress rather than support. The client meetings that required normal analytical thinking and strategic recommendations became increasingly difficult to manage while simultaneously processing evidence of systematic billing fraud that had violated every ethical standard that guided my professional practice. The necessity of maintaining competent performance while managing overwhelming personal crisis created extraordinary psychological burden. The business development activities that were essential for maintaining consulting practice viability became nearly impossible to pursue effectively during this period. The networking events and client relationship activities that had previously provided both professional advancement and personal satisfaction required emotional energy and social engagement that were severely compromised by the systematic deception required in my personal life. The financial analysis that I conducted during this period revealed that Richard's systematic asset theft would create cash flow challenges for my consulting practice that extended beyond the direct losses from fraudulent billing and unauthorized transfer. The legal expenses that would be required for comprehensive civil and criminal proceedings against Richard would strain business finances, while the reputation damage from association with his criminal activities could reduce client demand for my service. The contingency planning that these financial projections necessitated included consideration of worst-case scenarios, where client relationships were permanently damaged and consulting practice revenue declined substantially. The strategic planning required development of alternative income sources and business models that could sustain operations during extended legal proceedings, while protecting remaining assets from potential claims related to Richard's misconduct. The legal briefings that occurred throughout this period provided increasingly detailed documentation of Richard's criminal activities, while also revealing the complexity and duration of legal proceedings that would be required for complete justice and financial recovery. The civil litigation process would require months of discovery, depositions, and court proceedings, even with the comprehensive evidence that had been assembled. The criminal prosecution timeline would depend on law enforcement priorities and prosecutorial discretion that could not be controlled or predicted with certainty. The coordination meetings with Detective Webb, Attorney Morrison, and the forensic accounting team became the only sources of honest communication and strategic planning during this period of systematic personal deception. These professional relationships provided essential support for maintaining focus on long-term objectives while managing the immediate psychological challenges of the investigation period. The evidence review sessions that occurred weekly during this period included detailed analysis of additional financial transactions, communication records, and behavioral patterns that supported the comprehensive case against Richard's criminal enterprise. The systematic documentation of his fraud revealed patterns of deception that extended back nearly 2 years beyond the 18-month timeline that had been initially identified, indicating that the planning and implementation of his betrayal had been even more extensive than originally understood. The client relationship analysis that these expanded investigations revealed showed that Richard had systematically manipulated referral patterns and project opportunities to redirect business away from our joint engagements toward his exclusive project. The pattern of business theft had been disguised as natural market evolution and client preference changes, but the comprehensive analysis revealed deliberate manipulation that had cost my consulting practice substantial revenue over an extended period. The personal relationship documentation that Detective Webb had assembled through surveillance and communication monitoring revealed that Richard's affair with Jessica Morrison had been accompanied by detailed discussions about asset concealment, business manipulation, and eventual divorce proceedings that would maximize his financial advantage while minimizing my recovery options. The recorded conversations provided evidence of premeditation and conspiracy that would support both criminal prosecution and civil asset recovery proceedings. The psychological profile that emerged from these investigations showed that Richard's systematic betrayal reflected calculated decision-making rather than impulsive behavior or temporary moral failure. The planning and execution of his criminal activities demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of legal and financial systems that had been deliberately exploited to facilitate theft while minimizing detection risk. The comprehensive nature of his deception indicated personality disorders that made reconciliation impossible and future trust completely unwarranted. The timeline reconstruction that these investigations completed showed that Richard's criminal planning had begun approximately 6 months after our business restructure, which meant that his expressions of concern about operational efficiency had been pretexts for gaining access to financial information and client relationships that would facilitate subsequent theft. The systematic nature of his deception meant that virtually every significant business and personal decision during the previous 2 years had been influenced by his criminal objectives rather than legitimate partnership consideration. The asset recovery analysis that forensic accounting specialists completed during this period indicated that Richard had transferred approximately $600,000 from jointly managed accounts and business resources to accounts that he controlled exclusively. The transfers had been structured through complex financial arrangements that would require extensive legal proceedings for complete recovery, even with comprehensive documentation of the fraudulent activities. The offshore account investigation that international financial specialists revealed that Richard had established banking relationships in 3 different countries that had been used to conceal assets and facilitate transfers that would be difficult to trace through conventional investigation methods. The international scope of his financial manipulation would require coordination with foreign law enforcement agencies and compliance with international legal procedures that could extend recovery timelines substantially. The business valuation analysis that was completed during this period showed that Richard's systematic manipulation of client relationships and project opportunities had reduced the market value of my consulting practice by approximately $200,000 beyond the direct financial theft. The reputation damage and lost business opportunities represented substantial additional losses that would require separate legal claims for complete recovery. The insurance claim preparation that began during this period included documentation of multiple categories of loss that might be recoverable through professional liability, business interruption, and personal property insurance policy. The comprehensive nature of Richard's betrayal had created complex insurance questions that required specialized legal analysis for optimal recovery strategy. The anniversary dinner preparation that continued throughout this period became increasingly important as both strategic necessity and psychological symbol of transformation from victim to victor. The elaborate planning that had originally been intended as romantic restoration became the vehicle for comprehensive exposure of Richard's criminal activities and the beginning of his complete professional and personal destruction. The restaurant coordination that was required for the planned confrontation included detailed arrangements with management and staff that would ensure proper documentation of the evening's events, while maintaining operational discretion that would not compromise the legal strategy. The cooperation that Le Bernardin personnel provided reflected their professional commitment to supporting what they understood to be law enforcement proceedings rather than personal revenge activity. The evidence organization that I completed during the final week before the anniversary dinner included comprehensive documentation packets that would be presented to Richard during the confrontation phase of the evening. The materials included forensic, accounting reports, client billing analyses, asset transfer documentation, communication records,
and legal analysis that would demonstrate the complete scope of his criminal activities, while providing foundation for immediate legal proceeding. The psychological preparation that I undertook during this final preparation period included strategies for maintaining emotional control during the anticipated confrontation while ensuring that Richard's reactions and statements would be properly documented for subsequent legal proceeding. The training that Detective Webb provided in interview techniques and evidence preservation would prove essential for maximizing the legal value of Richard's expected admissions and denied. The communication strategy that I developed for client notifications that would follow the anniversary dinner exposure included detailed explanations of my role as victim rather than participant in Richard's fraudulent billing practices. The proactive approach to acknowledging problems and providing financial restitution would demonstrate ethical commitment while protecting client relationships that were essential for consulting practice survival. The media management strategy that Attorney Morrison recommended included preparation for potential publicity that could result from criminal prosecution of Richard's activity. The high-profile nature of professional service fraud cases meant that media attention was likely, requiring careful communication strategies that would protect my reputation while supporting law enforcement objectives. The personal safety considerations that Detective Webb identified included potential risks that Richard might pose when confronted with evidence of his criminal activities, and the certainty of criminal prosecution. The coordination with restaurant security and law enforcement personnel would ensure that the confrontation occurred under conditions that minimized physical risks, while maximizing legal documentation opportunity. The emotional preparation that this period required included building psychological resilience for managing extended legal proceedings, while maintaining professional effectiveness necessary for consulting practice recovery. The recognition that complete resolution would require sustained effort over many months, rather than single dramatic confrontation required fundamental adjustment of expectations and coping strategy. The support system development that I completed during this period included arrangements with professional counselors, trusted family members, and legal advisors, who would provide guidance and assistance throughout the anticipated legal proceeding. The systematic preparation for extended crisis management would prove essential for maintaining effectiveness during the complex challenges that would follow the anniversary dinner confrontation. The transformative moment that crystallized my understanding of the strategic opportunity embedded within Richard's systematic betrayal occurred during the final evidence review session 72 hours before our anniversary dinner. Detective Webb had arranged the meeting in Attorney Morrison's conference room to coordinate final preparations for the confrontation and ensure that all participants understood their roles in documenting Richard's expected reactions and admissions during the planned exposure. The comprehensive evidence portfolio that lay spread across the polished mahogany table represented 18 months of sophisticated criminal activity that had been methodically documented through forensic accounting analysis, private investigation, and legal research. The financial records showed systematic theft exceeding $600,000, while the business manipulation evidence revealed deliberate destruction of client relationships and competitive advantages that had taken years to establish through ethical practice and exceptional service delivery. However, as I reviewed the meticulously organized documentation for what I assumed would be the final time before implementation, a profound shift in perspective occurred that transformed my understanding of both the crisis and the strategic response that it demanded. The evidence that had initially represented devastation and betrayal suddenly revealed itself as the foundation for an unprecedented opportunity to demonstrate the power of systematic preparation, ethical conduct, and strategic thinking in overcoming sophisticated criminal manipulation. The realization that emerged during this review session fundamentally altered my emotional relationship to the entire crisis. Rather than viewing myself as a victim who had been exploited by someone I trust, I began to understand that I was actually a strategic professional who possessed comprehensive documentation of criminal activities and the legal resources necessary to achieve complete justice and financial recovery. The transformation from victim mentality to strategic mindset created psychological empowerment that had been absent throughout the previous 3 weeks of investigation and preparation. The business implications of this perspective shift extended far beyond the immediate legal proceedings against Rich. The comprehensive case that we had assembled would demonstrate to clients, colleagues, and industry professionals that my consulting practice was guided by ethical standards that prevented participation in fraudulent activities, even when that participation was unconscious and unintentional. The proactive approach to investigation, disclosure, and restitution would differentiate my practice from competitors who might handle similar crises through denial or damage control rather than complete transparency and accountability. The professional development opportunity that this crisis represented became apparent as I considered the expertise that I had gained through managing complex investigation, legal strategy, and business continuity planning under extraordinary pressure. The crisis management capabilities that I had developed through necessity would provide competitive advantage for future consulting engagements with clients facing similar challenges involving fraud, betrayal, or systematic deception within their organization. The marketing potential that emerged from this transformed perspective included the possibility of establishing specialized consulting services for individuals and organizations recovering from financial fraud or professional betrayal. The comprehensive experience that I had gained through managing my own crisis would provide credibility and practical expertise that could not be replicated through academic study or theoretical analysis alone. The network expansion opportunities that would result from successful resolution of this case included relationships with law enforcement professionals, legal specialists, and forensic experts who could provide referral sources and collaborative opportunities for future business development. The reputation that would be established through ethical handling of complex criminal matters would create competitive advantage in markets that required sophisticated risk management and crisis response capability. The timing coordination that this strategic revelation required involved carefully orchestrated implementation of the anniversary dinner confrontation to maximize both legal documentation and professional reputation benefit. The public nature of the exposure would ensure that industry colleagues and potential clients would witness my ethical response to criminal exploitation, while the comprehensive evidence presentation would demonstrate analytical capabilities and strategic thinking that distinguished my consulting practice from competitors. The communication strategy that emerged from this perspective shift included proactive client notifications that would position the fraud discovery as evidence of my ethical standards and investigative capabilities rather than professional liability or judgment failure. The detailed explanations of my role as victim, rather than participant, would be accompanied by comprehensive plans for financial restitution and operational improvements that would strengthen rather than weaken client relations. The emotional preparation that this transformation required involved developing confidence in my ability to manage complex challenges through systematic analysis and strategic response rather than allowing victimization to define my professional identity. The psychological shift from defensive reaction to proactive strategic implementation would provide the emotional foundation necessary for effective execution of the confrontation and subsequent legal proceedings. The legal strategy refinement that followed this clarity moment include modifications to the anniversary dinner plan that would maximize documentation of Richard's criminal admissions while ensuring that my professional reputation would be enhanced rather than damaged by association with his misconduct. The coordination with Detective Webb and Attorney Morrison required adjustments to evidence presentation and witness positioning that would support both immediate legal objectives and long-term professional development goals. The business continuity planning that this strategic insight demand included aggressive client retention and development activities that would leverage the crisis resolution as demonstration of analytical capabilities and ethical commitment that justified premium pricing and expanded service offering. The reputation enhancement that would result from successful crisis management would provide foundation for substantial practice growth and market expansion. The financial recovery strategy that emerged from this perspective included not only complete asset recovery from Richard's criminal activities, but also development of additional revenue sources through consulting services related to fraud prevention, crisis management, and business continuity planning. The expertise that I had gained through necessity would become valuable intellectual property that could generate substantial income through both individual consulting engagements and systematic knowledge transfer programs. The industry positioning that this strategic approach would create included establishment of thought leadership in crisis management and fraud recovery that would distinguish my consulting practice within highly competitive markets. The combination of personal experience with criminal financial betrayal and professional expertise in strategic planning would provide unique qualifications for helping other individuals and organizations manage similar challenges. The academic opportunities that could emerge from successful resolution of this case included potential teaching positions at business schools and professional development programs where my experience could provide practical education for future business leaders. The case study that my crisis and recovery would represent could become valuable curriculum content for strategic management and crisis response courses. The publication possibilities that this strategic insight revealed included opportunities to document the systematic approach to fraud discovery, legal response, and business recovery that could provide guidance for other victims of sophisticated financial manipulation. The professional recognition that could result from sharing expertise through industry publications would enhance reputation and create additional revenue sources through speaking engagements and consulting opportunities. The mentorship potential that would develop from successful navigation of this crisis included opportunities to guide other women who had experienced financial betrayal through systematic recovery processes. The combination of personal experience and professional expertise would provide unique qualifications for helping others transform victimization into strategic advantage through proper preparation and implementation. The networking expansion that would result from high-profile legal proceedings included relationships with journalists, industry analysts, and professional organizations that could provide platforms for sharing expertise and building recognition as crisis management specialists. Media attention that criminal prosecution would generate could be leveraged for positive professional development rather than simply endured as unavoidable publicity.
The technology applications that could emerge from this experience included development of systematic fraud detection and prevention tools that could be marketed to other professional service firms facing similar risks from partner betrayal or employee misconduct. The practical experience with investigating and documenting complex financial manipulation could provide foundation for creating technological solutions that would prevent similar crimes. The insurance industry opportunities that could develop from this expertise included consulting relationships with companies that provided professional liability and fraud protection coverage for business partnerships and professional service firms. The detailed understanding of fraud methods and prevention strategies would provide valuable expertise for insurance product development and risk assessment activities. The law enforcement collaboration potential that would emerge from successful prosecution of Richard's crimes included ongoing relationships with investigators and prosecutors who specialized in financial crimes affecting professional service firms. The expertise that I had developed through managing my own case could provide value for other investigations involving similar patterns of systematic financial manipulation. The international expansion possibilities that could result from this strategic positioning included consulting opportunities with firms in other countries that faced similar risks from partnership fraud and professional betrayal. The systematic approach to fraud detection and recovery that I had developed could be adapted to different legal and regulatory environments, while providing consistent protection for vulnerable professionals. The succession planning implications that this crisis had revealed included the importance of establishing legal and financial protections that would prevent similar exploitation by future business partners or employees. The comprehensive safeguards that would be implemented following resolution of this case would provide template for other professionals seeking to protect themselves from systematic financial manipulation. The educational content development that could emerge from this experience included creation of training programs for professional service firms, business schools, and industry organizations that would teach fraud prevention and crisis management capabilities based on practical experience rather than theoretical analysis. The combination of personal crisis management and professional expertise would provide unique qualifications for developing educational content that could prevent similar victimization. The anniversary dinner preparation that followed this strategic revelation included final coordination with all participants to ensure that the confrontation would achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. The exposure of Richard's criminal activities would provide foundation for legal proceedings while demonstrating my ethical standards and crisis management capabilities to potential clients and industry colleagues who would witness the event directly or learn about it through subsequent publicity. The evidence presentation strategy that emerged from this clarity included careful sequencing of information disclosure that would maximize Richard's admissions and reactions while ensuring that all criminal activities were properly documented for legal proceeding. The systematic approach to confrontation would demonstrate analytical thinking and strategic planning capabilities that would enhance rather than damage my professional reputation. The witness coordination that this strategic approach required included positioning of Detective Webb, Attorney Morrison, and documentation specialists throughout the restaurant to ensure comprehensive recording of all interactions and statements during the confrontation phase of the evening. The professional execution of evidence presentation would provide credible foundation for subsequent legal proceedings while demonstrating competence that would strengthen client confidence. The outcome management at this perspective demanded included preparation for multiple scenarios that could emerge from Richard's reaction to the evidence presentation. The strategic planning included contingencies for denial, admission, negotiation attempts, and aggressive responses that would ensure appropriate legal documentation regardless of his specific behavioral choices during the confrontation. The legacy planning that this transformative insight enabled included recognition that the systematic approach to crisis management and fraud recovery that I was implementing could provide valuable guidance for other victims while establishing professional expertise that would enhance consulting practice capabilities for decades. The strategic transformation of personal crisis into professional opportunity would create lasting competitive advantages that extended far beyond the immediate legal and financial recovery objectives. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.